many of you have stories that this last few years have been difficult. I know some of the stories, and I know that they've been hard, and I know they've been scary, and so we've all ventured through the last few years a little bit differently, and maybe your story's a little bit different, but I'm confident that many of you in here have had difficulties. And one of the things that we do when we talk about the coming of our King is on the Christian calendar, we call it Advent. And that word Advent actually just means coming. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of waiting. It's a time of waiting for Christ to come. And when he would come, what he would bring with him. And so one of the things that people celebrate during Advent is peace. That Jesus was coming into the world and what he was bringing with him was peace. And so I got to imagine some of you are in here thinking, okay, we're talking about peace coming into the earth. Well, newsflash. Life's hard. Life's difficult. I didn't ask for this. I didn't wish for this. There's things that are happening in my life that I wouldn't have wished for. And so this idea of peace really seems very foreign. Like, how could this be a part of my story? How could peace interact with what I'm going through? I'm sure there's some of you in here that could ask that question. And so when we talk about peace coming to earth, what I'm not trying to do tonight is I'm not trying to convince you that your present circumstances aren't hard. I'm sure they're chaotic. And here's the beauty of the Bible. I love the honesty of the Bible. The Bible's okay with the hard. The Bible's not trying to avoid your hard. They're not trying to juke it out. The Bible's very clear that difficulties and hardships happen in our world. Things that people wouldn't ask for happen in our world. So that's why you can come in my office. That's why you can call me and say anything to me. And I'm not saying, oh my gosh, no way. No, I believe it. When tragedy strikes, I believe it. It's not hard for me to believe because I've lived in this world for nearly 28 years now. Some of you are scoffing at that. But in 28 years, it doesn't take long to realize how broken and difficult this place is, right? And so when we think of things like peace, and the Bible affording us peace, telling us that peace is available to us, it's not trying to juke out your circumstances. Right? The Bible is okay with storms. It's not that there won't be storms, but that God will be with you in them. That's how peace can be afforded to you, is that God is not absent from you, that he's not distant from you in the storm. That you can have peace amidst the storm. The Bible teaches that. And so a life with no storms is a fairy tale that doesn't exist. I'll say it one more time. A life with no storms is a fairy tale that does not exist in our world. And the Bible's okay with that. And so when we talk about the first Christmas and peace coming in, oftentimes when we look back on history kind of, it fits like a play. You can see moments, you can see pictures, and you can see, what was happening. Right? It gives you a glimmer, a snapshot of events that took place. But just like any play, if you've been in theater or you performed in any kind of way, there's things called the backstage. There are things going on behind the scenes that nobody else really knows about. And so in the third nativity story that we get in the New Testament, it's almost as if the curtain gets pulled back and we get to see what some other details were that were happening that very first Christmas. And so tonight, the third nativity story is actually a nativity story recorded by John. And we preached through John, and maybe you said, hey, I remember John 1, that's not the nativity story. Sure, it's Jesus becoming flesh and dwelling among us. But where's the manger? Where's Mary in that? John doesn't record that. And then not in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Well, John writes one more book in the New Testament. It's the final book of the Bible. It's a book called Revelation. Not Revelations, Revelation, singular. And in this book is an apocalyptic vision. And so when you hear this word apocalypse, I think oftentimes we think, chaotic event, we think something futuristic, and all of that, yeah, sure, is in Revelation, but Revelation is more than that. Revelation, when you think about this word apocalypse, the root word, what it means is uncovering. So what John's doing through the book of Revelation is he's uncovering events. He's uncovering events from the past, He's uncovering events in his present, and he uncovers events that will be in the future. And so it's not just futuristic. But in Revelation chapter 12, John records for us the nativity story, and he uncovers, he pulls back the curtain and says, look what was happening that very first Christmas. And so we get to see John's story, his version. And so the title of my message tonight is Not Your Grandmother's Christmas Story. Now, we're going to see a different side. We actually see a message on the war of Christmas. Now, I didn't say the war on Christmas. I said the war of Christmas. And it's important because I know we live in 2021, and I know, Starbucks ain't our biggest fans as Christians, and, we get mad because the cup is just red, and we say, darn them, they're taking Christ out of Christmas. They've been trying to take Christ out of Christmas for 2021 years. That's not a new phenomenon. And the reason why they're trying to take Christ out of Christmas, because Christmas indeed, in fact, is a war. It was a declaration of war. And so I'm also talking about war tonight. And maybe you said, hey, Tyler, you said you were talking about peace. And now you're talking about a war. Which one is it? They're not mutually exclusive. I'm going to talk about both tonight because Jesus talks about both. A passage in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34, Jesus says this. He says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. So, right, we see a war mentality, war language here. Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. But then Jesus also says this at the end of his ministry. In John chapter 14, he says this, verse 27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Wow, Jesus, it seems to be a little bit of a contradiction happening here, right? Like other scriptures would testify to the fact of Jesus' peace. Isaiah calls him actually the Prince of Peace. In Isaiah chapter 9. But then here we see war mentality in Matthew 10, right? I'm come to bring a sword, war. So which one did he come to bring? He came to bring both. He came to bring both. I said it this way, in order for God to institute peace, he had to initiate war on the enemies of peace. You get what I mean by that? Well, there are things in our world that are the antithesis of peace. There are things like sin and death and disease and all those things, right? They're enemies of peace. They're not friends with peace. Those are things that we would say don't offer peace. And so Jesus' arrival was a declaration of war against those things. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful war. It's a war of loves. It's our only hope of true peace. And so without further ado, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 12. And again, as we look at this is apocalyptic literature, which means they don't read everything literally. Right? In order to interpret, you got to understand literary styles. And so this is apocalyptic writing. What John's going to do is he's going to write some things that are going to, if you read them literally, you'd say, that's insane, that's crazy, that's nuts. There's no way that's a true story. But what he's doing is he's putting out symbols that are going to excite your hearts. They're going to open your eyes. And what he's trying to do is he's expanding your vision of something. He's drawing you in. And so when we read some of these things, don't think, oh my goodness, this is what Christians actually believe. There's true meaning underneath that are going to help us understand the further details. And we'll see the familiar ties to the Christmas story that we read in Matthew and Luke. And so Revelation 12, verse 1 says this, and a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So in John's vision right away, what he does is he sees a woman. Again, this is symbolic. This is a symbol. He sees a woman. He doesn't give her a name, but he says, I see a woman. Well, if symbols represent either people or governments or events, then the question we need to ask ourselves is what or who does this woman represent? And I kind of let the cat out of the bag already. I told you this is a nativity story. And so What's the woman that we associate with nativity? Mary. Mary's the woman here, and I believe that Mary's the woman here. But here's where things get tricky within the book of Revelation. A lot of times symbols carry with themselves more than just one representation. And so while, yes, I believe that the woman is Mary, there are other things that are also tied along to this symbol, right? You see the things, right? She's clothed in the sun. She's got the moon under her feet. She's got a crown of 12 stars. And all of that is language that's symbolic in the Old Testament. And it's referring back to God's chosen people. And so this vision, this moment where he sees this woman, it isn't just Mary, but it's Mary and God's chosen people. And so what does this woman do? Look back with me at our text. Verse 2. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And so we know that this woman's about to give birth to baby Jesus, because right, that's the Christmas story. She's about to give birth, but really what I want us to see in this verse, what John's highlighting definitively in this moment is, what he wants you to see is that the woman is crying out in pain. It pops in the verse that the woman is crying out in pain. And any mothers in the room, I'm sure none of you are shocked by that, right? None of you are saying, wait, really? I've never given birth. I don't ever intend to give birth, personally, but I can imagine that it's painful. And so it's not a surprise. Mary makes sense here that she's crying out in pain, that she's about to give birth to a baby. And so she makes sense, but the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, are they about to give birth? Well, actually, yes. Yes. We're going to see something here in a moment, but the nation of Israel, they're about to give birth as well, because you see, there's a consistent pattern in the Bible. When the Bible uses this idea of labor is also symbolic of waiting on God to move. The nation of Israel had been waiting on God to move. Right? They were waiting for something to happen. They were waiting for God to come through for them. And sometimes we have to wait a while for God to move. Amen? So sometimes we have to wait for God to move, and it feels like an eternity. Multiple times in the Bible, you see this question pop up. How much longer? How much longer? That question pops up. How much longer is this going to go on? How much longer? And so when you think about this idea of waiting on God to move, I mean, the illustration that comes to my mind is like, we're like kids on a long road trip. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Well, a child certainly knows that you're not there yet. Otherwise, the car would be parked and they'd be getting out. What is the child really asking? How much longer? How much longer? And so when we go through difficulties in our lives and we're waiting on God to move, we're like, God, are we there yet? God, when are we going to be done with this? And waiting on God to move can be so painful at times. And I'm sure that's the normative for us. I'm sure there's very few of us in here that would say, man, I was waiting for God to move, and before I could even ask him to do it, he just did it. No, that's not the story. Right? It isn't he blows your socks off because how fast he's moving. Right? And so I know that if we got some church folks born and raised, I'm one of them. And you know the Sunday school answer when we talk about waiting on God, well, God's timing, perfect. And if he's making you wait, then there's a reason for that. And yes, like I'm not discrediting that. I'm not, I believe that God's got a plan and he's working and moving and everything happens for a reason. But that doesn't take away from how difficult and how painful it is to actually still wait. Like knowing the Sunday school answer, like don't allow the Sunday school answer to just minimize someone else's pain. I think one of the worst things you can do to somebody is they come and they express their heart and their ache and their pain. Cheer up. God's got this. That's true. I'm not saying don't share that, but you minimize the pain, the reality of the hurt, when you just say, don't worry about it, God's got it. He does got it. But it's okay to just mourn with somebody. It's okay to just say, hey, this hurts. That's hard. It's painful. And maybe in here tonight, you're just waiting for God to move in your life. And he hasn't yet, or at least in the ways you've wanted him to, he hasn't. Or the timing that you've wanted, he hasn't. Maybe it's marriage. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe there's something going on and you say, God, when are you going to fix this? When is it fully going to be restored? Or maybe it's something with your job. Or maybe it's that you want to be married and you're just not married yet and you're just waiting and you're saying, okay, God, when are you going to do something? But this is very real for a lot of people. No one thinks the valley of affliction is fun. Right? We want to avoid hardships. Why? Because they're hard. I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know that. I'm not convincing you of something new. But the particular analogy that we get in the scriptures about the pain of waiting, the analogy of labor. The analogy of labor. And the point is to remind us of the truth that we don't rather not think about. That there's actually something good on the other side of suffering. That there's actually something good on the other side of pain. And sometimes you just got to venture through it. Sometimes you have to walk through the mess. Sometimes you have to endure the storm. Have you ever heard the phrase that good things come to those who wait? The Bible's got a different definition. It says that good things come to those who endure. James 1 verse 12 says this, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Romans 5:3 says this, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. And so we know this reality. We know it to be true in our everyday lives, don't we? Because when was the last time you got stronger, you got more yoked from not working out? When you go to the gym and you have to break down the muscles and you have to feel the ache of the muscle. I got to be careful. I don't want to rip this shirt, you know what I mean? Making sure you're all still with me. But when was the last time you got emotionally stronger without going through something hard? When was the last time you got good at something without practicing? The toil of practice. Right? So we know this to be true. We know that pain in a lot of areas of life is not a bad thing, but in spite of that, when difficulties and hardships come our way, what we want more than anything is just get out of there. And I wanted to say, hey, you know what? It might be good to go through it. It might be good to journey that way, because on the other side, Mary's pushing, Mary's waiting, Mary's going through the thick of it. What did she end up getting to do? Hold baby Jesus. God's chosen people waiting. What was on the other side of that? The Savior, the promised one, the king that would come from the line of David. You got to experience his entrance into the world. And so I want you to take a moment. I want you to just take 1 minute to think about a place in your life where you say, it's painful, it's hurting, I don't like it. Take a second to capture that moment in your life. You'd say, if I could change one thing happening in my life right now, this would be that one thing. When you have that thing, I want us to think about that for a second, because I want us to picture what God wants us to picture through the pain. That there's something good on the other side. That suffering and pain and hardships produce something in you that you couldn't get to without that. You don't get to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger without some serious work and without some serious pain. And so we think about those people that live with joy and hope and peace. People have endured. People have walked through things. They've been strengthened. You don't get strong without going through things. So that's why I want you to think about your present situation and think about it through the lens, the beauty of the labor metaphor. That on the other side is good, that good things come through enduring. But this isn't the only detail that John gives us from the first Christmas. Verse 3, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems or crowns. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen that in the nativity story. Right? But I think that would be awesome. Like next year, I think if we could get like this big blow up red dragon, we could put it out front. We all good with that? Like, how baller would that be? What other church is doing that? So this is part of the nativity story. Maybe you say, I've scoured over Pinterest and I've looked at all the nativity Christmassy setups and I've never seen it. Hey, we don't look for the nativity at Pinterest. We look at it in the Word of God. And I can say from the Word of God, there's a red dragon there, right? So in the first story, we see a red dragon, and we know what the red dragon is representative of. Very definitively, very clearly, Revelation 12:9 says this, and the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And so without any shadow of a doubt, this red dragon is representative of Satan. But it's more than that. Just like the woman, there's layers to the symbol. Right? Because it's not just a red dragon, but it's also a red dragon with 7 horns and 7 crowns, right? You see that language there. And that language, throughout the Bible, represents governments that Satan was basically using to oppress God's people. And so surely one of these is probably talking about Rome. Right? In that context, surrounding Rome's capital were 7 hills. Right? And so John here is showing you the more symbols to show that this isn't just Satan, but it's more than just Satan. And so, things like Rome, but beyond Rome, Satan's used other governments before Rome and after Rome. So I think what John's actually showing us with the various symbols is that this dragon is Satan and his worldly weapons, his human weapons that he has. And so up until this point, what we see in the story is this woman who's about to give birth to baby Jesus, and then a red dragon shows up out of nowhere and is really angry. Of course, the dragon's angry. Of course, but why is the dragon angry? The answer is simple, because of what God has done. See, God fired the first shot. God threw the first punch. And he said he was going to do that. He actually told Satan, hey, you know what? I'm going to come. I'm going to crush your head. He said that in the garden. Genesis chapter 3. I'm coming for you. And so centuries have gone by, past. Satan thinks he's getting to rule this world, no problem. And so it almost began, he thought it was an empty threat. He thought he could have this world to himself. And so Jesus showing up was, whoa, what are you doing here? This is my territory. This is my world. And he's like, remember that promise I said about crushing your head? I'm going to do it. Like, it's happening now. And as I picture the story playing out, you see the dragon appears, Satan appears, and the question, what are you doing here? This is my territory. Well, this is what Satan does next. The first part of verse 4 says this, his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And so in my opinion, the stars are representative of the angels that left with Satan. And I think you can see that in the Bible. You see stars and angels interchangeably at times. So I think these can be symbolic of each other. And I think it's clear in Revelation 12 that they are, demonic forces. But a tail snatches 1/3 of the stars, symbolic of Satan and those that would rebel with him. But what else does the verse show us? It says that he cast them down on the earth. Now, that word cast is another word is hurled. So don't think like casting a net. Think like hurling a spear. So this scene happens, right? Jesus shows up into the world, and what Satan does next, the fight that he does next, is he takes the demons and he throws them there. He's like, all right, all forces on earth right now, let's wreak some havoc. But there's a war at play here. In this moment, the first Christmas, what it initiated was an all-out assault, and the general Satan is commanding the demonic forces to mess things up. Jesus' arrival was God kicking the hornet's nest. We're not playing games. This is a fight now. Something I thought was interesting as I was preparing for the message was in the Old Testament, Satan exists. You see demonic forces exist, but very minimally. Very, very minimally. But then you get to the Gospels, you get to Jesus, and it seems like almost instantaneously, you're dealing with demons everywhere now, right? It seems like every other page, Jesus is doing something like Harry Potter, right? He's dealing with demons and demonic forces, and what's the switch? What happened? John lets us in Revelation. He said, man, when Jesus came into the world, everything intensified. Satan saw it as an act of war. He saw it as a fight, and he came out fighting. Right? And so when we look at the destruction of our world, we see the chaos surrounding our society, our culture, and what's going on? It's a war. It's a fight, and he's going to keep fighting tooth and nail. But it's clear the fight is over. We'll get to that. But of course there's chaos. It's Satan's line of defense. It's his line of attack. But it's not just Satan's demonic forces that are at play. He himself is very active in this first Christmas. Second half of verse 4. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore the child, he might devour it. Satan's directly involved in this story. And if you're familiar with the first two nativity stories in Matthew and Luke, you know that how Satan tried to devour Jesus right out of the gate was through Herod. Right? Someone who was operating under the authority of Rome. Stirred him up to kill every male child under the age of 2 in the vicinity of Bethlehem. And so this was his attempt to devour baby Jesus. And at the end of Jesus' life, Satan tried devouring and stirring up Jewish leaders to hand Jesus over to Pontius Pilate, who would put him on a Roman cross and under Roman crucifixion. Again, another leader operating under the authority of Rome. And again, this is another attempt to devour. The fight to keep Christ out of Christmas started 2,021 years ago. That's when it started. Don't be surprised by it. I love the warnings we get in Scripture. Don't be surprised at spiritual warfare. It will happen. Right? Like Peter says that you have a real enemy who's seeking to devour. That's his scheme. That's his mode. That's his move. Don't be surprised by it. And so when difficulty befalls the Christian, we should not be surprised. We should be amongst the least surprised people because we know the scheme. We know Satan's plan. And so the question we must ask at this point in the war story, who wins? Who wins? Does Satan win? No. No, he doesn't. Verse 5. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. That's the messianic prophecy from Psalm 2. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now that last part sounds a little bit odd. It's almost as if wait, you're saying she gave birth and immediately Jesus was ascended to heaven? Is that what happened? That's not what happened. We obviously know that from Scripture. That's not what happened. What John is doing is he's summarizing the life of Jesus in its entirety, from beginning and ending, right? As a way of saying Satan lost. The dragon lost. Satan wasn't able to devour the child. Satan wasn't able to. He was able to ascend. He was able to rule and reign today. Satan couldn't have won. And here in this moment in the story of Jesus' life, where a bystander could look and say, isn't Jesus devouring? Right, as Christians today, we go through hardship and we can think, isn't he winning? People would have thought that on the first Easter, the first Good Friday, as Jesus hanging on a cross, Roman crucifixion, and you'd say, Jesus lost, Satan's won, evil reigns. But that's not the story. Because 3 days after his crucifixion, 3 days after Jesus was put on that cross, he rose from the dead. He conquered death. He conquered Satan. He conquered sin. Right? Jesus' exiting of the grave was his declaration of victory. It was saying, hey, I came and I did and I conquered. Vini, vidi, vici. Right? He came, he saw, he conquered. Oh, beautiful. the life of Jesus, the story of Jesus. That Jesus wins, Satan loses definitively, finally, ultimately, and permanently in that moment. Because what Jesus did when the resurrection was not only did he defeat sin, he did defeat sin on the cross, and he paid for our sins there, but he also did more. He defeated sin's agent called Satan. And so that's why I can be confident. I don't know everyone's single story in here. I don't know what you're asking how much longer to. But man, I can tell you that when you have devoted your life to Jesus, when you've walked with him, that he's going to get you through that pain, and that he's going to get you to the other side, and that there's actually good things there. And I'm not preaching prosperity gospel here. Do not confuse me. I'm not saying you go through hardship and you get health, wealth, and prosperity. That is not what the Bible teaches. But that when you venture through the storms of life, that you experience more of God's strength, you experience more of his grace. That's why Paul can say, I can boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell upon me. Right? That I can experience affliction and suffering and actually experience more of the riches of Christ than I could ever in prosperity. And so, friend, don't despise suffering. Don't despise it. God can use it. Right? We see that Jesus wins, that he conquers. John summarized that in Revelation 12, verse 5, that he ascended back to heaven, that he's presently ruling and presently reigning. And I love how John, in his gospel account, in John chapter 1, verse 5, summarizes the same thought that he did in Revelation 12, verse 5. This is what he says in John 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The light shines. In other words, the light invades. The light declares war. The light doesn't lose. The light conquers. Satan wasn't able to devour the child. And as we close this message tonight, maybe you're wondering the why. The why of this story. Why would he come to earth and declare war? Why would he stir things up? Why would God kick the hornet's nest? Because he loves you. That is the simple answer. Because God loves you. We have an enemy here. I'm telling you, the world is jacked up. He's out there trying to fight still. And it looks pathetic. But he's out there trying to fight. And what he wants to do, what Jesus said, what Satan is doing right now is he's seeking to kill, and destroy. And some of us, we give ourselves over to sin. And sometimes we think that there's going to be more life there, that we think there's going to be more joy there, we think there's going to be more peace there. No. What he's really doing, yeah, sure, it might seem enticing for a moment. Life apart from God might seem enticing for a second. But it will destroy you in the end. But Jesus says, but I have come. And I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. And so when we look at Jesus coming and stirring up the fight, he's doing so because he loves you. He's waging war to demonstrate love. He's trying to give you life. He's not trying to steal from you. And so tonight, as we picture this first Christmas, and what was really happening there was Jesus was affording you the opportunity at peace. And he does it by bringing light into the world. And you can experience his joy, his love, his peace through relationship with him. And the Bible tells us if we were to confess with our mouths and believe in our hearts that God raised Jesus from the dead, we would be saved. We would have true life. We'd have true purpose and meaning and hope and peace. And so if you're here today and you've never done that, I want to invite you to do that today. You know, I know your circumstances might tell you that God can't be trusted, and he is telling you more than anything to show you that he cares and that he's involved and that he's working and that he's moving. He said, I'll show you how serious I am by dying on a cross. He died for you. Every one of you. He died for you so that you might experience life. Make that the greatest Christmas present you'd ever receive. Let me pray.